Hi, my name is Alon Skuy. I'm a photographer at the Times newspaper, and I covered the events on the 16th of August 2012, the tragedy that unfolded in Marikana, and I'd like to share some of my recollections of the events a year on from the tragedy. The Marikana Platinum Mine near Rustenburg was the scene of a wildcat strike leading up to and on the 16th of August in 2012. The miners working at the British-based Lonmin mine were involved in a number of violent incidents between the South African Police Service, the leadership of the National Union of Mine Workers, NUM, and the strikers themselves. This culminated in an event in which many miners were killed and a further 70 of whom were injured in the ruckus. I didn't cover much until about the 14th of August, when the newspaper sent me to the mine to see what was going on, because there were reports of a lot of violence and a lot of tension and hostility. I arrived at the Kopi, which they called it, which was very close to an informal settlement which a lot of the miners lived at in very poor conditions, and opposite from the Lonmin mine where the guys worked. And there were hundreds and hundreds of these angry striking miners who wanted a 12.5% pay increase because they were unhappy with the hours that they were working and the conditions that they were living in. A lot of them were armed. A lot of them had knob carries, spears, knives, machetes, and they were trying to make their voices heard. We got close to the Kopi and I was taking pictures along with a lot of other photographers. A lot of other news crews were also there, and there was quite a big police presence, and there was word that the police wanted to disarm the miners because they were carrying really dangerous objects, and there was talk that there would be a violent incident the next day if the miners didn't disarm. The next day I went back to the mine itself and looked around, then went to the Kopi. A lot of guys still gathered, and there was quite an unflinching stance from the miners that they would not move and they would not compromise. And there was a real tension, and along with other photographers we thought something is going to happen, but we didn't realize the extent and the sheer tragedy that would unfold in front of us a couple of hours later. The police called in reinforcements. There were a lot of tactical units, a lot of heavily armed police, and they used barbed wire to surround and block in areas of the Kopi. And the photographer said to me, we should go inside there and take images around there. And I thought, no, this is going to be quite dangerous, because you never know what would happen with the police, because they seem like they're really on edge and they wanted to break up the gathering. So we positioned ourselves on the right of the police, between protesters and the police, but on the side where there was a kraal with cows and livestock. A group of miners, they formed a line and started approaching the police, and they snaked around the side. And then I heard rubber bullets being fired, gunshots being fired, and I didn't know where they were coming from exactly, and a lot of tear gas. And we went around, we couldn't breathe properly. All of a sudden we started hearing like a popcorn type of sound, and a lot of smoke, a lot of dust, a lot of miners running backwards and forwards, scattering, and I started running around. The dust settled, and I looked towards where there was a lot of police action, aiming their guns, and they were removing certain weapons and trying to secure the scene. And I saw a lot of men lying on the floor, and I didn't realize at that point, I thought they were injured and they were lying on the floor from pain, and I didn't realize that a lot of these guys had been shot dead. I started looking closer, getting closer to the scene, and I saw a lot of horrific injuries. Guys' heads had been shot. There was a lot of blood. Guys were groaning and struggling to get up, and I thought, wow, this is a real tragedy at this point. It took a while to process exactly what had happened. I felt a sense of urgency to cover and to get close to the scene and to take pictures of exactly what had the aftermath of that police intervention. And guys, there was a lot of media trying to get close. The police were on edge. There was a policeman trying to swat my camera away. So I was shooting through the police, through their backs, and trying to get around to see exactly what had happened. The police pretty much brought in cars and tried to block off the scene after that happened. We also didn't know that there were a lot of dead and injured out of sight from the actual media, because the police had cordoned off quite a big area. After the police came, I think the paramedics arrived maybe 15 minutes to half an hour later, and the cars were blocking off the scene. I rushed to the car because it was getting late and it was getting dark, and then the scene was over. And then driving back from Rustenburg to Johannesburg, I was trying to process and make sense of exactly what had happened, not even having the full picture. I have been back a number of times to that area since the 16th of August 2012. I covered a cleansing ceremony that happened in July. Many families were going to the site for the first time since they lost their family members, and that was extremely emotional. And women broke down when they arrived by buses at the scene of where their husbands and partners and family were killed. And families went out to the field where the tragedy occurred and slaughtered sheep there. Each family member were involved in a certain ritual. Certain families actually requested to perform rituals at the exact place where their family members died, and not on the kopi. And at the end of the ceremony, white doves were released by families as a sign of peace, as a symbolic gesture. It was quite a precarious spot that I was in, but I didn't feel too vulnerable, because I didn't know the extent of what was going on around me. There was tear gas all over the show and the sounds of gunfire, and I was caught up in photographing this frenetic scene that was happening around me. It's a year now since the tragic events that unfolded in Rustenburg, and there's stuff planned at the kopi and the area itself, memorial services for the dead miners. And I'm sure it's going to cause a lot of grief and open up a lot of wounds for people, and real tragedy that's etched in the minds of every South African, I think.